Well, there's your problem.
Alright, so today we're doing the S2000 brake job. So the first thing that you have to do is loosen up the lug nuts while the car is on the ground. Jack it up with a jack and then secure it with jack stands. Don't work on your car without jack stands because it's not safe. So today we're just going to swap the pads. I'm putting them back to my street pads because I'm not going back to the racetrack until I get a roll bar. So, to get the caliper, or to get access to the pads, you take a 12mm socket and then a wrench, and you use the wrench to hold the slide bolt in place while you undo the other bolt. Undo the lower one only, take it off, and your caliper will slide up like this. And what this allows you to do is just pop out the pad, pop out the other pad, and then we can pop in the new pads. Just like that. Now I need to push my piston back in a little bit. Okay, so I just use a hammer to push the piston back in. You can use a C-clamp or there's actually a spreader tool that you can buy that goes in there, push back in, anything works. But that's it. That's all that's involved in changing out the pads. Now, the other thing that you can do when changing your pads is you can put the brake lube on the back. It's supposed to eliminate noise, but the shims that come on these pads do a good job of that, so I don't worry about putting that stuff on. And if you need to change your rotors, you need to take off the entire caliper, and that is a 17mm bolt. When you remove the caliper, then you have to take the rotor off. To change the rotor, there's two screws here. These have to come out, and then there's these bolt holes here where you can screw in a bolt to help press the rotor off. But what I do is, since I'm usually changing the rotors, I just take a big hammer, hit the rotor off. That's it as far as that goes. The torque specifications for these bolts are 24 foot-pounds. I just estimate it. I don't really worry about torquing it down, but if you want to do it right, you should torque it to 24 foot-pounds. And the torque specs for these big bolts that hold the entire caliper assembly on is 79.6 foot-pounds. So just round it up to 80. You should be good on those. But if you're just changing pads, those don't need to come off. You only have to do one bolt. So let's go ahead and tighten this up. Alright, now as far as pad thickness goes, the acceptable thickness of the pads is 1.6 millimeters. That's what it says in my factory service manual. I like to replace my pads when they get to about the thickness of the backing plate. Same thing as the front. Loosen the lug nuts when the car is on the ground. Jack it up. Put it on jack stands. And then before we remove the brake caliper, you need to release the handbrake. Anyways, same thing as the front. This one's held on by the 12mm bolts, but this time we need to take off both 12mm bolts to get to the brakes. You remove the caliper like this, and you don't want to let it hang by the brake line because it's bad for the brake line. So I just kind of push it back into here so that it's sitting on the A-arm. Now we have access to the pads. So take the pads out and then put the new pads. Oops. Slide the new pads in like that. Now the wear indicator is supposed to be facing down, so I messed up on that, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'm not putting the brake lube on these pads either. They don't make any sound anyway, so it's fine. Now, if you need to push the piston back in on this, you'll notice that this one has a cross on it. You don't need a special tool for it, you just need a 3/8 drive socket, and it fits in like this, and then you can just turn the piston like that, and it will go back in. Now when you're doing that, when you're pushing the piston back in, you're pushing fluid back up into your master cylinder. So you have to take that into account. If there's extra fluid up there, it's going to leak out and cause damage to the car. So it's important to remove that. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put this back on. These bolts are torqued to 24 foot-pounds. So if you're going to remove the rotor, you need to remove the 2 bolts that hold on the entire caliper assembly, and then remove these screws, and then remove the rotor. Those bolts are torqued to 79.6 foot-pounds. These bolts that we took off are 24 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and put these back on. Alright, so you did your brakes. Good job. It was pretty easy, but I'm proud of you. Couple last minute things. I torque my lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds, drive around the block, and torque them again. And then torque them a week later. And it's really important to do that because, especially on this car, I've noticed that the lug nuts need to be repeatedly torqued until the wheel settles in place. The other thing is, don't go driving off right away. If you push your piston back in at all, the pads are not seated on the rotor, and you might press your brake pedal and not have brakes. So it's important to pump up your brakes to get pressure in the system before you start driving. Now the other thing I do is put my truck pads in a box and then put them away on the shelf neatly so I can find them when I decide to go to the track again. In this case, that's going to be when I get my roll bar. That's it. Thanks for watching.